Welcome to Friday Night Readers. I'm your host, Jules, a real-life Rory Gilmore. Fueled by coffee, I help you read, live, and write like a Gilmore in our little corner of the world. Step into a virtual Stars Hollow in a world of books, just like Rory. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our Friday Night Readers newsletter community on Substack. You'll get instant access to a free printable list of the 475 plus books on Gilmore Girls, plus even more Gilmore Girls inspired content, like our Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge, which we've been doing together since 2021. Paid members get exclusive extras, like the list of books from the show with episodes, which I've personally verified over several years of rewatches and wrote about in my book, The Unofficial Guide to the Books on Gilmore Girls. Come hang out where the real Gilmore magic happens. FridayNightReaders.substack.com. Hello, Friday Night Readers. I have got a really great topic for you today. This is one that has been in my mind for, I'd say, at least 2 years now. It's about Shakespearean tragedies and how I think they are more unhinged than reality TV. And I think that this lines perfectly with why we take the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge. It's to make reading the classics easier and more fun. And I recall reading Hamlet in particular outside on my back porch a few years ago for the challenge, and my mind was just blown. I just kept thinking, it almost feels stranger than fiction, what is happening and how many twists and turns this is taking, and how they're motivated by these really deep and dark emotions. And what it reminded me of was, I'm someone who watches 2020 and Dateline almost every Friday night. I am not just a Friday night reader, I'm also a Friday night watcher. And in particular, I just kept thinking of that Murdaugh murder mystery, where the story starts in one place and then it just gets deeper and darker and more chaotic and more layered and more tragic. And that's exactly how Shakespeare is. So this has been on my list for a long time. And this month, because we are reading short books in the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge, and because I like to read one William Shakespeare book every summer, particularly during July, I consider it to be like my very own Shakespeare in the Park. I take it outside on my back porch or in my little outdoor reading nook under the deck. I thought it was finally the perfect time to talk about this. And yes, we are going to compare it to watching reality TV. And that is because when you watch the most binge-worthy reality TV shows, it's like you cannot make this stuff up. My husband and I recently rewatched Vanderpump Rules, which I had only watched since the Scandival time, but he had watched from the beginning. So we watched it from the beginning together. Now, this is a very toxic friend group. We'll get into that a little bit more later. And they are in Hollywood, so I feel like that heightens tensions as well. But there were so many times where I turned to him completely dumbfounded or laughing out loud and saying the greatest scriptwriter in Hollywood could not come up with this plot. But ironically, somehow Shakespeare does. He really captures that you can't make this stuff up kind of plot. And I think that is why his work remains so timeless and actually is escapist during the summer. Even though I know it feels challenging and we will get to some tips as well. But what's genius about him is that he actually did make this stuff up. And hundreds of years have passed. The world has changed in so many regards, but the strongest emotions that are within humans remain the same. Things like jealousy and betrayal and ambition. So of course, I've got to connect this one to Gilmore Girls for you. Shakespeare's name is mentioned 7 times. Only Charles Dickens' name is mentioned more often as far as authors go. I know because I spent years tracking it. And Shakespeare's titles, they have 21 mentions. So before we get into my 5 favorite Shakespearean tragedies, let's talk about the characteristics that make them up and why they are worthwhile, especially if you watch as much Bravo as I do. Okay, so Shakespeare wrote 12 tragedies, and he did so in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. These were the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, and his plays reflected the types of concerns that were happening at the time, and a lot of this was about power and human nature. So naturally, in writing about these topics, he drew a lot from history. They usually follow a very strong protagonist. We'll see a lot of political leaders here, but this person also has a flaw, and it's not just a flaw, it's a fatal flaw. Because it's so strong, it leads to conflict, a very twisty climax, sometimes with many plot twists, and an ending that is absolutely catastrophic. So what kind of fatal flaws are we dealing with here? Again, things like ambition and jealousy. You'll also see pride and even indecision. That one's interesting to me as an overthinker. And now that we know the flaws, let's talk about what kind of actions these personality traits lead to. We're going to see a lot of murders, a lot of betrayals, revenge, even going mad, supernatural elements like ghosts. And as a Gilmore Girls fan, you may even already know about the witches in Macbeth, double, double, toil and trouble, and something wicked this way comes. Rory and Lane say that to each other in the show. And these tragedies are also known for very memorable soliloquies. If you read the book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which was one of my books of the year and a Jimmy Fallon book club pick, that title comes from the soliloquy in, I believe it was Macbeth. One more thing we also have to talk about is the role of fate. More often than not, fate is something that's hinted at in order to build tension as the characters make choices within that framework. What do I mean by that? It's more like a vibe that feels very ominous and like this isn't going to end well. So think of Julius Caesar, where they say, beware the Ides of March. It's like you get the feeling that fate is destined, but the choice of the characters still drive the fate that actually occurs. Now, if you head to the show notes and read the Substack post that accompanies this podcast episode, you can find the full list of all 12 Shakespearean tragedies. But right now we are going to talk about the 5 most tragic plays Shakespeare ever wrote. First is my favorite, Hamlet, and this is a family drama that is more passionate than true crime. As I mentioned, the reality show that I would pair with it is Dateline. So what is it about? Hamlet is a prince who returns home and he discovers his father is dead, but that's only the beginning. His uncle has married his mother, and then a ghost claims it was all murder. So it's a real triple whammy for Hamlet. Now, Hamlet is an overthinker like me, so instead of acting, he launches into this elaborate investigation, does a ton of overthinking. The investigation even involves a play within this play, but eventually his overthinking leads to madness that dooms everyone around him. Now, I already mentioned this, but I'll just expand upon it a little bit. Reading Hamlet hooked me, pulled me right in, and did not let me go until the last page. Truly like watching a true crime documentary. What's interesting to me about true crime, as someone who's followed it for so long, and as someone who is a book lover and a lover of stories, is taking that look at the passions that motivate us. And in true crime, that leads to the darkest actions. That's exactly what you see in Hamlet. It's like your brain cannot comprehend the chain of events that is unfolding in front of you. One tip I want to tell you about Hamlet is that you can pair it with the very heart-wrenching book Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. There was a recent movie adaptation of that as well, which was very good. I did prefer the book, but anyway, it is the emotional story of how Shakespeare's son died, which actually inspired his writing of this tragedy. The reason I like the book better is because it's so slow moving, and I say that in the best way possible. You feel like you are going breath by breath with this family and what they are experiencing. For me, that's what makes it extra emotional. I do know, though, that many love the adaptation for Hamlet's mother's performance in it, and I do believe she won the Oscar for that. For some, it was more about how she portrayed the emotions of a mother in the circumstance, whereas for me, it was about how the words conveyed them. Okay, so now let's talk about where you can find it in Gilmore Girls. It's actually mentioned, 7 times. And I do have all 7 of those references in the show notes for you, in case you want to pair your reading with your rewatches. I'll give you a few quick examples. In Cinnamon's Wake, Lorelai says to perm or not to perm. That's season 1, episode 5. And that is from the line to be or not to be. Here's a fun one. In the third Lorelai, season 1, episode 18, Trix says, neither a borrower nor a lender be. That is also from Hamlet. Season 2, episode 16 is titled There's the Rub, and that is actually one of my favorite Shakespearean lines. And what it means is that's the tricky part. So you might say something like, I want to read all night, but I've also got to sleep. There's the rub. One more funny reference for you is in season 7, episode 15, Emily compares golf to the tragedy of Hamlet. She's such a character, isn't she? Okay, let's move on to King Lear. This is a dysfunctional family at its most dysfunctional. The reality TV show I paired with it is Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and when I tell you the plot, you're going to see why. So King Lear is an aging king. You can think of him like Kris Jenner. Now, he decides to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters based on who flatters him the most. I mean, seriously, this is a perfect match. He disowns the one daughter who truly loves him. I'm going to peg this one as a Chloe, then empowers the 2 who don't. That would be Kim and Courtney. And as a result, he watches both his family and his kingdom descend into civil war. Now, we didn't see an actual civil war on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but we sure did see a lot of arguments. My mind keeps going back to that scene very early in the series where they are just starting to become rich and famous, where Kim buys a Bentley and her other sisters are so mad at her that it turns into this verbal and physical altercation where they resort to slapping each other with their purses. Now, I read King Lear in high school, and I only vaguely recall the experience. It's kind of funny when I think back to high school. There's a lot of books that I can physically remember myself, where I was in the room and what the room looked like, and even some of the things my teacher was saying or my classmates were saying, but I don't totally remember much beyond that. So what I do remember here is that my class liked it and that it wasn't too hard for us to understand. I was in 10th grade at the time. Now, this one is not on Gilmore Girls, but I still wanted to include it because it's one of my favorite tragedies and it's one of the most popular tragedies. So consider it Gilmore adjacent or Gilmore inspired. On to Macbeth. For me, this one is about ambition flying too close to the sun. So when we think about ambition and rising to power, the reality TV show that comes to my mind is Survivor. I actually was not a huge fan of this show, but I do find it especially relevant to what we do here as readers like Rory Gilmore because of how popular it was in the early aughts especially. So in this tragedy, 3 witches predict that Macbeth will become king, and then along with the persistence of his wife, they decide to just speed destiny up a little bit. So one royal murder quickly snowballs into more, and while we're talking about snowballs, that leads to hallucinations, paranoia, and a kingdom completely ruled by fear. This leaves Macbeth desperately trying to outrun the consequences of his own ambition. So you can see the parallels here to Survivor, which is known for things like forming alliances and either trusting or not trusting people as you're trying to climb to the top. Macbeth, I believe I read the summer before I read Hamlet for our Rory Gilmore reading challenge, and this was an excellent reading experience for me. It's pretty close to Hamlet, definitely my number 2. What I love about it is that in many ways, Lady Macbeth is actually the star of the show. And you see this especially in the Denzel Washington, Frances McDormand adaptation, which is also just a few years old. And I watched that afterward, and it really helped me understand the story and appreciate it much more. Lady Macbeth is so dark, and I also love how the witches here are used to give that ominous sense of fate. It feels very autumnal, which of course we Gilmores love. Where can you find it on Gilmore Girls? Now, I did mention this one earlier when Rory and Lane talk about double, double, toil and trouble, and something wicked this way comes in reference to Paris, Madeline, and Louise during one of the most popular episodes of Gilmore Girls, Concert Interruptus. That was season 1, episode 13. It's also discussed at Chilton in season 2, episode 9, Runaway Little Boy, which is the one where they perform Romeo and Juliet. You may also love that Darren Springsteen says the line "one fell swoop" in season 3, episode 3. Something wicked this way comes is also said in A Year in the Life's fall episode. How seasonal. This is when the Life and Death Brigade has their fun little music scene. And if you head to the show notes and click to the full Substack post, you'll find every reference to Macbeth. On to Othello. This is going to be a fun one. I'm describing it as toxic levels of manipulation. And the reality TV show I am pairing with it is the one I mentioned very early in this episode, which is Vanderpump Rules. Now, Vanderpump Rules is about a group of friends who are workers at a Hollywood restaurant, and in the beginning, they are aspiring actors as well. And this group, wow, there are all kinds of betrayals and secret hookups, arguments, gossip behind each other's backs, lying to each other's faces, and of course, disastrous results. The show was never the same and did end after one of the main characters, who had been in a relationship on the show for over a decade, had a secret affair with another character's fiance over the course of an entire year. So how is Othello like this show? Well, Othello is a very respected military general, and he secretly marries a woman he loves called Desdemona. But at the same time, his lieutenant is really upset about a promotion Othello made and wants to destroy him. So he makes this plot that involves all kinds of lies and manipulation. He even plants evidence to turn this happy couple into a heartbreaking tragedy. I've got to admit to you, while I absolutely love Vanderpump Rules, I liked but didn't love Othello. What I did like about it is that it reads like the telephone game. It's like one thing leads to another, and as they do, the lines between reality and perception are blurred, which is really so common in real-life relationships. That's exactly what we see on Vanderpump Rules. Here, though, it's mixed with very violent reactions. There's nothing in particular that made me not like Othello. It just wasn't as good as the others for me. I do still think it is definitely worth reading, especially if you can consider it in that context of a very toxic group. And if you want to pair it with a Gilmore Girls rewatch, it's mentioned in season 2, episode 19, Teach Me Tonight. Rory says she will read it to Jess. This is when she's tutoring him. And then later in season 3, episode 15, when Rory goes to the hockey game in Face Off, she talks about jealousy in the context of Othello. And of course, this is when she meets Lindsay. Fifth and final is Romeo and Juliet. This one is young love with deeply permanent consequences. As adults, we know that young love is often very fleeting, but here the characters cannot escape the depths of it. The reality TV show I paired with it is Netflix romance documentaries in general, and the one I was specifically thinking of was The Crash. This one came out earlier this summer, and what happens in The Crash is that a teenage girl who I believe was still in high school crashed a car literally into a brick wall at 100 miles per hour, and this killed her boyfriend and her passenger, but not her. As the accident was investigated, it was revealed that the crash actually looked more intentional than accidental, and the motivation appears to be a breakup. That said, I've seen several really crazy romance documentaries on Netflix in particular. So you may already know that Romeo and Juliet is about 2 teenagers who are from rival families, and they fall madly in love at first sight. There is just something about forbidden romance, isn't there? So they secretly marry within days. And besides this, they make other increasingly impulsive decisions. Of course, they are very young and driven by this especially deep first love, paired with things like hormones and testosterone. Along the way of their bad decisions come miscommunications and some pretty bad timing. And this family feud becomes one of the most famous tragedies in classic literature. I had an amazing reading experience of Romeo and Juliet. This was my first Shakespearean play that I read in high school. And again, I can actually picture myself in the classroom and in my seat while we were reading it and discussing it. I did think it was fairly easy, and it's also a great place to start with Shakespeare. And this is because most people already know both the storyline and some of its famous quotes. Star-crossed lovers, a rose by any other name, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" It's so well known that even kids know it. I'll tell you a quick story. So my cat's name is Romeo. That is the Italian version of Romeo. And he's named after a cat we actually did meet in Italy. And of course, my name is Julianne. So we sent our Christmas cards out one year, and someone told me that their 7-year-old daughter, who is a book lover, said to her, "Oh, her cat's name is Romeo and her name is Julianne, like Juliet." And I thought, wow, that is sharp. She's only 7 years old. Of course, the actual story would be too advanced for her, but it just goes to show how well known the story is. So for me, it also totally helped that the epic Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes adaptation, in my humble opinion, one of the best book adaptations of all time, an absolute relic, released at the exact same time that my class read this book. And again, going to the theater and experiencing this with your group of friends was a whole experience and really a core memory of my high school years. Now, as Gilmore Girls fans, I definitely think you're going to like it. There's so much that's iconic about it, like the wings that Claire Danes wears and the incredible music, the bright and bold cinematography. It's definitely a modern classic. Now, this is one that I also think would be awesome to pair with a Gilmore Girls rewatch. Of course, they did perform Romeo and Juliet in season 2, episode 9, and my absolute favorite part of that episode is when Paris, the new Romeo after Tristan leaves, leans over Rory and says, "With a kiss, I die." It's just such a classic moment for me. It's so emblematic of the strange but growing friendship between Paris and Rory. A few more places you'll find it on Gilmore Girls is in season 3, episode 8. Jess mentions it to Luke, and this is when he and Rory are starting to get hot and heavy. That line, "by any other name," Lorelai also says in season 4, episode 16, The Reigning Lorelai, another epic one. And early on, season 1, episode 12, Lorelai calls Sookie and her new suitor, Jackson, as this famous couple. Again, you can find all the Gilmore Girls references for these 5 tragedies in the Substack post that is in the show notes. You will also find a poll that asks which Shakespearean tragedy is the most tragic. I can't wait to hear what readers think of this. I tend to think Romeo and Juliet is going to win the battle. Okay, so I hope that comparing Shakespeare's most tragic works to the unhinged nature of reality TV makes them feel both easier and more fun for you, just like pairing them with Gilmore Girls episodes. But before we go, I want to share a few more tips for reading Shakespeare. Again, I started this in 9th grade, and I still do it every summer for Shakespeare in the Park vibes. This July, I actually picked A Midsummer Night's Dream for a challenge this month. So first, I think that you have to accept that it's not going to be easy, and it's not just you. I'm not some magical reader. I'm not smarter than everyone else. I'm just willing to struggle my way through the text. Dialogue changes throughout history, and even today, sometimes I don't understand even what my nieces are saying, who are 11 years old. So why would I understand the way people talked in Shakespeare's time? At the same time, I think it's also important to know that it will be worth it. And I hope that the way I talked about these tragedies helps you to understand why it's so worth it to me. These are stories that really grab you and hook you in, which is always what we want as readers. In many ways, they're also like history lessons. And that's because so often they're about people in power. What can happen when a certain flaw drives their power beyond control? So once you keep those things in mind, how should you actually tackle the text? The way I do it is something called no fear editions. I've talked about these many times. I usually get them at my library sale for something like $1 or $2, and I just grab them when I see them. What they are is on the left side, they have the original Shakespearean text, and on the right side, they have a modern translation. It is an absolute game changer. Another thing you can do that I love to do with the classics is to listen to an audiobook while you are looking at the words. This really helps me maintain my focus, especially in an age when our focus is so fractured. And even when I read the No Fear editions, I still go to summaries and analyses online, things like SparkNotes, to give me a little bit more context about the plot, and even the historical time in which it occurred. Lastly, I've mentioned a few adaptations, and I find that always helps. And I thought of a new one this year. Not only can you watch an adaptation, which may stray from the original text, but you can also watch a performance. These Shakespearean tragedies are in the public domain, so you can actually just go right on YouTube and find some performances. Either watch and read along, whatever works for you. All right, so I did my best here to inspire you to dig into Shakespeare and to feel both excited and confident in doing so. Yes, it actually can feel like a night of Bravo. So I hope you'll do as I do and make your own Shakespeare in the Park this summer. See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Friday Night Readers. I love having you here in our little corner of the Gilmore Girls world. If you'd like even more feel-good fun, then upgrade to a free or paid email subscription membership at FridayNightReaders.substack.com. Free members get my personally verified list of the 475 plus books on Gilmore Girls. Upgrade to paid for the list with episodes based on my years of rewatches and the writing of my book, The Unofficial Guide to the Books on Gilmore Girls. You'll also unlock members-only posts like monthly recaps, as well as full community access to our chats. It's the coziest virtual place like Stars Hollow, and your support helps keep this podcast going strong. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a minute to rate and review the show. It helps other Gilmore fans find us, which helps me provide you with more content like this. Until next time, life's short, read fast,